Ooh, tomato pie. Let's start. Parmesan buttermilk crust. In a food processor, you're going to want to add 2½ cups of all-purpose flour, 1 cup of finely shredded Parmigiano-Reggiano cheese, a ½ teaspoon of kosher salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And now you just want to pulse about 3 times until it is combined. Next, you're going to add the fatty stuff. 3/4 cup of cubed, cold, unsalted butter, and also about 1/4 cup of cubed, cold, solid vegetable shortening. Now you're going to need to pulse this until the butter and the shortening are pea-sized pieces. 5, 6, 7 times will do it. Now while the food processor was running, I drizzled in 6 tablespoons of whole buttermilk. And then I turned the food processor off. And you want to process pulsing the dough until it just begins to come together. Get you a large piece of plastic wrap. Put your dough out on it. And you want to lightly knead the dough into a ball. Pick up all those little crumbly pieces. Then you need to flatten it into a disc. Cover it very tightly in the plastic wrap. You know, this crust is trouble, but it's well worth the flavor in the tomato pie. Put it in the refrigerator for a minimum of 2 hours or up to 2 days. While the dough was in the refrigerator, I decided to go ahead and start prepping my tomatoes because it does take a little bit of time. For this recipe, you want to use around 3 pounds of assorted medium to large heirloom tomatoes. So I harvested from our garden my favorites, Cherokee Purple and also pink Brandywine. So what I'm doing here is I have a tray and I've lined it with paper towels. And now I am cutting slices of tomatoes about 1/4 inch thick. The recipe actually suggests cutting them 1/2 inch thick, but that just seems like really thick slices, so mine are more like a fat quarter. I'm placing about 7 or 8 slices onto the paper towel on the tray. You just need enough to cover the top of your pie. After you have your slices all ready to go, you want to sprinkle them with 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt. Just a little light dusting of it. Salt always helps to draw out the moisture in fruits and vegetables. So that's what I'm doing here. You want to cover with additional paper towels, and you're going to reserve this, so set it aside. You won't need it until the very end. So it's time to prep the rest of your tomatoes. You want to arrange them in a single layer on a lightly greased wire rack set on a large baking sheet. And again, you want to sprinkle with another half a teaspoon of the salt. You want to bake these tomatoes in a preheated 400-degree oven until they are slightly wilted and dried out, which is going to take about 40 to 45 minutes. Now when they come out of the oven, they're going to need to cool completely, which is going to take probably a good hour. You know, you can roast them up to a day in advance. And when they have cooled, you can store them in an airtight container in the refrigerator. But they look so yummy and so caramelized, which enhances their flavor. While the Parmesan buttermilk crust dough was chilling in the fridge and the tomatoes were cooking and then cooling, I started prepping for the rest of the filling of this wonderful tomato pie. First up, you want to use some aged white sharp cheddar cheese. And you want about 6 ounces or about a cup and a half packed. And I'm shredding it here. This cheese is really important to use. It's a must because whether it is aged for months or even years, it gives it this signature flavor, and you get a lot more bang for your buck that way. Plus, sharp cheddars also have a lot less moisture than their regular counterparts, so that's going to help with keeping the filling very firm. Now, you can use white or yellow. I prefer the white. The color you choose is just going to make the filling appear either lighter or darker. And what would a good tomato pie be without some bacon? You need 6 thick slices of bacon that you need to cube. Additionally, you're going to need 2 shallots. Now I've set my diced bacon, my diced shallots, and the grated cheese off to the side because now it's time to get that Parmesan buttermilk crust rolled out. I've got 2 pieces of wax paper here, and you want to roll it out on a floured surface. I also put a tiny bit of flour on the top of the crust, and then I put my extra piece of wax paper and start rolling. And I gotta tell you folks, be prepared because this is a stiff crust. You gotta put some muscle in it to get it all rolled out. You want to roll it into about a 15 to 16 inch diameter circle, and they suggest it being about 1/3 of an inch thick, which seriously y'all, that's a really thick crust. Mine is probably not quite that thick, somewhere in between maybe 1/4 and 1/3. After you've rolled it out, you want to transfer it to a 9-inch deep dish pie plate. It's going to need to be deep because the filling gets pretty thick. Once you have your crust all pressed down in there nicely, you want to trim the edge to about 1 inch. If you got a shy place somewhere, you can rob from Peter to pay Paul. Now here I want to show you how my mama taught me to do a fluted edge. Maybe your mama taught you the same way. And now you pop it in the freezer for 20 minutes. Whether using store-bought or homemade dough, don't forget to blind bake the crust. That's important because this extra step will keep it from turning soggy as the pie bakes. Here I'm putting in parchment paper and some pie weights. Now if you don't own pie weights, you can use beans, but the pie weights sure are nice. We're going to bake it at 400-degree oven for 20 minutes. Ooh-wee! Can you smell that sizzling bacon a-cooking? So, while the pie crust was in the oven for the first 20 minutes of baking time, I started the bacon in a hot pan on medium-high heat. You want to saute this bacon for about 4 to 5 minutes or just until the fat begins to render. At that point, you want to add your chopped shallots. I chopped 2 of them, and you want to cook it with the bacon until the bacon is crisp and the shallots are nicely caramelized. That'll take about another 6 or 7 minutes. Lastly, you want to stir in 2 teaspoons of garlic and cook that just until it's fragrant, which only takes about a minute. Don't overcook it or it will burn. At that point, use a slotted spoon and scoop out all that yummy bacon, onion, garlic onto a plate lined with paper towels to drain. After 20 minutes, you want to pull the crust out, remove the parchment and the weights, and put it back in the oven to bake until the edges are golden and the bottom of the crust is set. That'll take about 8 minutes. And from here, I need to go out to the garden to harvest some herbs. You know what this is, Cookie? You ready? You ready to go to the garden? Let's go. Hold on. Hold on. You know what hold on means. Not going to hold on. Need some chives, about a 1/4 cup. Oh, smells so good. I don't know if that's a 1/2 cup.
No, a little more.
Yeah. Okay, well, putting the mix together now. In this bowl, I've got the 1/2 cup of chopped basil and 1/4 cup of chives and an egg. And now I'm adding 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard. I like the Grey Poupon. Next up is 1/2 cup of mayonnaise. Blue Plate, real mayonnaise. don't forget your cheese. That 1.5 cup of packed, aged, sharp cheddar cheese. You want to mix that really well. Get it nice and blended. And then add a 1/4 cup of, not a 1/4 cup, oh my goodness, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and some pepper to your taste. And of course, the bacon. And fold that in nicely. And guess what, folks? We're finally ready to assemble. You want to put 1/3 of your cheese filling mixture in the bottom of the pie crust and spread it gingerly. I like to get this bottom layer nicely covered. And next you're going to put 1/2 of those wonderfully caramelized roasted tomato slices over the top of the cheese mixture. Press it down. Then another 1/3 of your cheese mixture on top of those tomatoes. The other 1/2 of your beautifully roasted heirloom tomatoes. And the last 1/3 of your cheese mixture. Then finally, topping it off with those fresh tomato slices. Now you can overlap these if you'd like. My slices were so large that I just kind of nestled them side by side, but you want to completely cover the top of your beautiful pie with those beautiful slices of heirloom tasty tomatoes. And finally, because you've pre-baked this crust, you need to kind of protect the edges. Now, that little ring I have is something my mother gave me that works normally on a 9-inch pie, but it was kind of lopsided, so I added some foil. And you could just use foil. And now it's time to bake it. Oh, we're so ready for that. 400 degrees again, between 40 and 45 minutes until it's set. At that point, you need to let it rest for about an hour. And then you sprinkle with a little bit more fresh basil and some fresh chives. And ooh la la, your tomato pie is ready to consume. It is yummy.